They told me I wasn't enough before I even realized what that meant. Sarah looked at me that night, eyes glossy with forced composure, and said, "My parents think you're a downgrade from my ex. I don't want to make them uncomfortable." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded and said, "I see." And just like that, 2 years of my life, the nights I stayed up fixing her credit, the weekends I spent helping her move, the quiet mornings where we laughed over coffee, vanished into a memory that no longer included me. I first met Sarah on a rainy Tuesday. She was sitting on a curb outside the cafe, arms wrapped around herself, hair plastered to her face, tears streaking down like rain mixing with the city's grime. Her ex, Todd, had left a trail of chaos behind him, unpaid debts, late-night arguments, and the kind of emotional manipulation that makes you question your own worth. She called him charismatic, I called him a storm, and she was barely holding on. I didn't see a mess, I saw someone willing to be rebuilt. Our first conversations were cautious. She didn't trust easily. I didn't push. I listened, learned the rhythm of her thoughts, the spaces where she held her pain closest to her chest. Nights turned into weeks. I helped her sort bills, reorganize her finances, make sense of the chaos Todd left behind. Every small victory became a brick in the structure I was quietly building around her, an invisible scaffolding that held her together when she didn't even know she was falling apart. I became her anchor, her stability, not in flashy gestures, but in the quiet, unnoticed moments, reminding her of deadlines, offering rides to interviews, making sure the rent was paid on time. I wasn't just a boyfriend, I was the infrastructure of her life. She laughed when I made her grocery lists color-coded. She rolled her eyes when I nagged about car insurance, but I could tell she appreciated it. We built routines, coffee on Sunday mornings, library trips on Wednesdays, silent evenings with old movies, so ordinary they almost seemed unremarkable, yet to her they were life-changing. It wasn't romance at first, it was peace, and peace was addictive when you'd been drowning in chaos for years. I felt like I was giving her something she didn't even know she deserved, and she clung to it. Slowly, she let me in, not just into her apartment, but into the spaces she'd left empty, where Todd's shadow had lingered. I remember the first night she cooked for me. She laughed over burnt edges and spilled sauce, and I felt my chest tighten, the kind of ache that whispers, "This is important." And it was. Every ordinary moment was a declaration, "You're safe here, you can breathe here, chaos won't reach you in this space I've built for you." And yet, as I held her steady, I began to notice the subtle frictions. Tiny comments about Todd, how he had this energy she missed, how she wished she could laugh like that again. Small jokes that felt more like tests than humor. I brushed them off, thinking the trauma lingered, that old love doesn't fade overnight. We spent holidays together, but I always noticed her glancing at her phone a little too often, her fingers lingering over messages that she never sent me. When we went out with friends, her laughter sometimes carried a hint of nostalgia for something I couldn't give her, unpredictability, danger, chaos. I reminded myself, patience. Stability has its rewards, but it is never as immediately intoxicating as disaster. For 2 years, I was her quiet constant, the shadow that held her together. I helped her graduate, celebrated her first real paycheck, and watched her confidence bloom like spring after a long winter. Yet somewhere, hidden in the folds of that growth, I began to sense a tension I couldn't fix with bills or rides or reminders. The calm I provided began to feel like a cage to her, invisible but undeniable. The night she told me about her parents' opinion, I realized how invisible I had been in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had built her a life so safe, so functional, that when chaos came back knocking, she welcomed it with open arms. And I had been nothing more than the walls keeping the storm at bay, the contractor who repaired what had been broken, only to be discarded once the house stood whole again. I watched her leave for the wedding, a tailored suit pressed and hair perfect, and I saw Todd sliding into the Uber beside her. The clarity hit me like a punch. For her, I was temporary. For her family, I was a placeholder. For me, the lesson was brutal and silent. Stability is invisible, chaos is seductive, and sometimes love isn't enough when the heart craves excitement over security. I walked back through the apartment that night, each step echoing in the empty rooms. The air smelled of her perfume and cold disappointment. I touched the furniture, the TV, the little things I'd arranged, and felt the weight of 2 years dissolve into silence. And in that quiet, I began to think, not of vengeance yet, not of justice, not even of heartbreak, but of understanding. Understanding what it meant to be used not maliciously, but conveniently. Understanding how patience and observation were now my tools. Understanding that I had the power to reclaim the narrative of my own life. I spent the following days walking through routines I had built so carefully, yet noticing her absence in every corner. The apartment felt larger without her laughter bouncing off the walls, quieter without the sound of her keys dropping onto the counter. I told myself it wasn't about her, it was about learning, observing, planning, seeing patterns in her behavior I hadn't allowed myself to notice while wrapped in the comfort of being the safe one. It started with small things. Late-night texts she claimed were from friends, but I caught her pausing before typing, her fingers trembling slightly, her gaze flicking to the mirror as if rehearsing words that weren't meant for me. A fleeting smirk at a notification she quickly hid, a slight stiffening when I entered a room unexpectedly. Subtle cues I once ignored now stood like warning signs flashing in red. I remembered the way she had described Todd, the energy he brought, the chaos she said she secretly missed. At the time, I had laughed it off as nostalgia. But now, in the silence she had left behind, I began to see the pattern. The thrill of uncertainty was a part of her hunger, one I could never satisfy no matter how carefully I built our life together. My consistency, once a sanctuary, was now a contrast to the disorder she craved. Every interaction she had with me was framed by comparison, me versus Todd. Every laugh, every sigh, every whispered confession had a shadow of him lurking behind it. And I realized something cold and undeniable. She didn't just love chaos, she needed it. I wasn't the kind of storm she wanted. I was the calm she tolerated until the tempest returned. I replayed our past months in my mind. That night she celebrated her first promotion, the pride in her voice when she told me she had landed the job she'd worked for so long. It all had been real. Yet beneath the surface, I could see the undercurrent I had ignored. Every smile tinged with impatience, every compliment shadowed by a longing for the drama she couldn't create herself. I started keeping a mental ledger of everything she had said, every interaction she had. It wasn't obsession, it was preparation. She had underestimated the quiet patience of someone who had been wronged but had learned the rules of engagement. She had thought loyalty was weakness, that I would accept the silent betrayal she was orchestrating. She had no idea how carefully I observed, how much I had learned. I remembered a conversation we had about her family's expectations, about appearances at events, and the subtle pressures they placed on her. I had nodded then, offering nothing but agreement, pretending it didn't sting. But now, reflecting back, I realized that those pressures were never hers alone. They were a tool, a lever for control, and she had wielded it effortlessly, until she left. Every detail mattered. The timing of her texts, the phrasing of her words, the way she would hesitate before agreeing to plans, as if weighing her choices against someone unseen. I noticed the gaps, the silences, the moments she omitted crucial truths. Each one painted a portrait of someone who had become comfortable manipulating the people around her to maintain a sense of control. And yet, she didn't see me, not really. Not the part of me that had grown strong in silence, that had built patience like steel around my resolve. I wasn't the desperate lover she could toy with. I was the observer, the strategist, the man who understood that time was the ultimate weapon. I began walking the neighborhood she had loved, the small park where we shared coffee, the library where she laughed over her textbooks. I watched, quietly, as she interacted with friends and acquaintances. There was a lightness in her step, a spark that had always been there, but now it was directed at others, not at me. And with each passing moment, the picture became clearer. She thrived on admiration and attention, but it was fleeting. She was addicted to being desired more than she had ever been to being cared for. In my apartment, I started reorganizing her things, as if rehearsing control I hadn't yet needed. Not to steal, not to destroy, just a mental exercise in understanding the magnitude of influence I had once held. Every book I had placed on the shelf, every cushion arranged with precision, every little touch of order, it had been my invisible mark. And now, in her absence, I could see how quickly the environment, the life, the security I had built could vanish if left unchecked. I remembered Todd again, how easily he had captured her attention, how effortlessly chaos had seduced her. The comparison she had made between us was obvious, but the lesson was subtler. People like her are drawn to disruption, to drama, and to thrill. Security is boring, stability is ignored, and the call I had provided had, unknowingly, set the stage for her inevitable departure. I did not feel anger. I did not feel despair. I felt clarity. I understood that the best revenge, the cleanest justice, would not be emotional. It would be methodical. It would be deliberate. It would be legal. It would be precise. And most importantly, it would be mine. I spent those nights walking through scenarios, visualizing the outcomes, considering the steps, and imagining her face when she realized that her comfort had a cost she never anticipated. Every movement I plotted in silence, every choice calculated. And with each thought, I felt the tension build, not for immediate retaliation, but for the eventual moment when patience and strategy would converge into a single, undeniable statement. Her messages began to arrive, casual, friendly, tinged with nostalgia. I replied minimally, never revealing the awareness that had taken root in me. Each word I sent was measured, neutral, deliberate. I let her think she still had influence, while all the while I was constructing a plan that would leave no room for negotiation, no room for manipulation. And in those quiet hours, as the city hummed outside my window, I finally understood the true nature of our relationship. I had been her anchor, her safe harbor. She had been the storm, and the calm had endured long enough to observe, to learn, and to prepare. I knew the betrayal would come, and I knew exactly how to meet it, not with shouting, not with rage, but with calculated silence and the law on my side. And in that knowledge, I discovered a strange satisfaction, a quiet exhilaration in the inevitability of what was to come. I saw her for the first time in weeks at the wedding. She moved through the crowd like a force I had once known intimately, her laughter echoing against the marble floors, ringing with the confidence I had helped nurture. And yet, every note of joy was poisoned by the realization that it was not meant for me. I had imagined scenarios, rehearsed confrontations in my mind, but nothing could prepare me for the quiet, devastating clarity of witnessing her choose Todd over me. I stood at the edge of the room, my tailored suit perfectly pressed, hands tucked neatly in my pockets, as if to remind myself that composure could be a weapon. She spotted me just barely and smiled, a smile that once belonged to our private world, but it was fleeting. Her eyes immediately darted past me, scanning the room, finding him, Todd, the storm incarnate, the chaos she craved, the man who had left her in ruin, yet now stood there with an air of entitlement she had never hesitated to welcome. For a moment, I felt the instinct to intervene, to explain some truth that could justify the betrayal. But I didn't. I let the moment stretch, let the scene unfold in slow motion, each beat of her heartbeat audible in the silence I carved around myself. She approached him, and as they embraced, the world seemed to contract, folding into a single point of humiliation. The place I had once held in her life, the nights I had spent steadying her, protecting her from the wreckage of Todd's past, all of it reduced to a vacancy she had filled with the very chaos she had long claimed to despise. I retreated quietly to the restroom, my reflection in the mirror unfamiliar. The man staring at me was calm, measured, but beneath the surface, every nerve was alight with betrayal. Not anger, not sorrow, not even heartbreak. Those were distractions I could afford to discard. This was recognition, the acknowledgement that everything I had done, every hour, every dollar, every ounce of patience, had been received and then discarded with a casual smile. I returned to the table only to see her whispering to friends, laughter spilling easily, as if our entire history were a footnote in her current narrative. I remembered the small things, the way she would lean on me when her credit card got declined, how she relied on me to fix her car registration, the nights I stayed awake listening to her anxieties, calculating solutions in my head while she slept beside me. It was all gone. And yet, I did not react. I simply waited. I sipped my water slowly, letting each swallow be a reminder of the patience that had been drilled into me over 2 years of quiet observation. I allowed the humiliation to simmer, not for her, not for anyone, but for me. This was the moment that justified the strategy, that demanded the slow, precise response I had been preparing. After the ceremony, I returned home while she went to an after-party, laughter trailing out the door. I entered the apartment she had helped decorate, the home I had filled with stability and comfort. I moved through each room deliberately, touching the things I had paid for, arranged, maintained. Nothing was impulsive, nothing was destructive. Everything had intent. I packed, slowly, carefully. The TV, the speakers, the console, the router, all the quiet infrastructure I had built to stabilize her life, gone. I left no note, no message, no trace of emotion that she could use against me. A key left on the counter, the apartment transformed from sanctuary to hollow shell. When her father called that evening, confused about why I wasn't at the wedding, I told the truth calmly. She had lied to cover for Todd. She had manipulated the narrative to suit herself. I did not yell. I did not cry. I stated a simple fact. If I'm such a downgrade, I removed myself from the equation. The messages came pouring in shortly after. Anger, blame, desperation. Her attempt to regain control over the situation revealed every facet of her reliance, not on love, not on loyalty, but on convenience. I read them all, word by word, emotionless, cataloging her attempts to manipulate, to guilt, to reclaim something she never valued until it was gone. I waited until she returned, until the familiar sound of her keys jingled in the lock. She stepped inside, expecting confrontation, expecting chaos, perhaps even tears. Instead, she found silence. A flat, empty apartment, the life she had taken for granted erased with quiet precision. "You're right," I said when she finally spoke. "I am boring. I'm loyal. I'm stable. I don't cheat. I don't cause scenes. And I'm done being the safety net you fall back on when chaos destroys you." She faltered. Her carefully rehearsed words failed her. She searched my face for anger, for emotion she could use to negotiate her way back. There was none. Only clarity. Only patience. Only a recognition that what she valued had never been me. And in that moment, for the first time in 2 years, I felt relief. Not heartbreak, not rage, not even vindication. Just the quiet, undeniable freedom of reclaiming my own narrative. The humiliation she had inflicted upon me had no power, because I had already anticipated it, planned for it, and transformed it into a lesson. I walked away, leaving behind the apartment, the bills, the careful routines, and the person who had once been the center of my world. The storm she craved had returned to her doorstep, but this time, I was no longer the calm keeping it at bay. I spent the next few days in silence, walking through the apartment that had once been our shared world, now hollow and still. The hum of the city outside reminded me that life went on for everyone else, but for me, time had slowed. Every detail of her absence became an instrument of clarity.
the unmade bed, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in corners, the cold quiet where laughter used to echo. I didn't call her. I didn't respond to texts. I didn't leave messages. Silence became my companion, a shield and a tool. In that quiet, I allowed myself to reflect, not with anger, not with despair, but with meticulous observation. I catalogued every interaction, every compromise, every moment I had devoted to her, and I asked myself a single question. How could the injustice of being treated as a placeholder be corrected, not emotionally, but strategically? I began to map out the situation like a chessboard. Every relationship she had, every dependence she relied on, every assumption she had made about my stability became a point of leverage in my mind. I wasn't planning revenge in anger. I was planning justice in patience. I wasn't impulsive. I was deliberate. Her friends still reached out occasionally, asking about me, hoping to bridge a gap she had created. I responded minimally, leaving every conversation carefully neutral, giving nothing away. I allowed her to think she still held sway, while quietly observing. Every detail she revealed about herself, every casual brag about Todd or her life, became information I could use to understand her patterns, her values, and her vulnerabilities. In the evenings, I reviewed our shared accounts, the bills I had paid, the subscriptions I had managed. I noted how easily she had relied on me for stability, how much of her comfort had been built atop my efforts. This wasn't anger, it was fact, and facts are the backbone of any plan that intends to succeed quietly, efficiently, and legally. Sleep was measured and deliberate. I allowed my mind to wander, but only along carefully chosen paths. I rehearsed conversations I might never have. I imagined her reaching out, thinking she could manipulate the situation, and I tested my responses, ensuring that every option I might take would serve the ultimate outcome: reclamation of autonomy, restoration of justice, and complete emotional closure. I avoided friends at first, knowing that exposure might compromise the calm I needed. I walked the streets alone, observing the world without distraction, noting human behavior, patterns of trust and deception, the subtle signals of intentions unspoken. In this period of isolation, patience became my ally. Every moment I spent quietly cataloging, planning, and observing strengthened my position. I began small experiments in detachment. I removed myself from her digital footprint, adjusted account permissions she had assumed control over, and slowly disentangled the threads that bound my life to hers. These actions were minor, almost imperceptible, but each one was a rehearsal for the eventual moment of finality. Her attempts to contact me increased slightly over the weeks. Each time I answered briefly, providing only necessary information, never emotion, never acknowledgement of betrayal. She grew frustrated, confused by my composure, unaware that this was the calm of someone who had already understood the scope of what had transpired.
In my solitude, I explored the legality of every step I could take. I researched landlord-tenant laws, property rights, financial obligations, every potential action she could exploit, and prepared my responses meticulously. I wasn't seeking retribution through chaos or aggression. I sought correction through the precise application of law, observation, and timing. Every night ended with reflection. I documented my thoughts, not as a journal for her, but as a roadmap for myself. Every wrong she had committed, every assumption she had made about my place in her life, every subtle manipulation became a note, a reference, a building block for what would come. And slowly, an understanding emerged. This wasn't about her losing. It wasn't about me winning. It was about reclaiming what had been quietly surrendered. It was about asserting agency over the part of my life she had treated as disposable. It was about quiet, inevitable restoration. I walked through the empty apartment again, fingertips brushing shelves I had arranged, tracing the paths where her presence once lingered. I breathed deeply, tasting the stillness, and realized that power doesn't roar. Power waits. Power observes.
And in this silence, I discovered a strength that neither chaos nor charm could penetrate. By the end of the third week, I had constructed a plan, a sequence of legal and psychological maneuvers that required no violence, no confrontation, only timing, intelligence, and unwavering patience. The plan was subtle, unassuming, and above all, certain. Every step she would expect me to take out of anger or heartbreak, I discarded. Every step she would anticipate, I reversed. And in that preparation, the first taste of satisfaction emerged, the anticipation of justice, measured, calculated, and inevitable. I did not rush. I did not speak. I did not let my presence be known. I allowed the calm to settle, the tension to thicken, and my strategy to crystallize. By observing, by recording, and by patiently awaiting the precise moment, I had taken control, not through aggression, but through awareness. And as the city lights flickered outside my window, I finally felt it, the quiet, unshakable certainty that when the moment came, it would not be chaos that struck her, but clarity, the clarity that comes when patience meets precision, and the scales of fairness finally tip. I chose the moment carefully. Not when anger flared, not when pride demanded satisfaction, but when every piece was in place and her assumptions about me had lulled her into complacency. She thought I would disappear quietly, or worse, that I would beg, plead, or rage. She was wrong. The first step was subtle. I reviewed every account, every shared payment, every asset I had touched on her behalf. Where I could legally reclaim what had been mine, I did. I contacted the landlords, confirmed payments, updated account access. Every action was documented, methodical, and above all, entirely legal. There was no impulsive satisfaction here, only precision. She began to notice. At first, it was small, subscriptions missing, online accounts reconfigured, minor changes she thought were glitches. But to me, each reaction was data, each question or accusation a confirmation of the patterns I had observed for weeks. She grew frustrated, trying to reach me through every channel, attempting to assert control over the very life she had abandoned. I escalated carefully. Bills I had once covered were redirected. Services I had co-managed were adjusted to reflect ownership. The apartment, once a shared sanctuary, had already been emptied. Her sense of stability began to erode, not dramatically, but gradually, like water wearing down stone. At every step, I maintained composure. Every phone call was calm. Every response was neutral. No rage, no bitterness, no trace of emotion. She assumed I was confused, overwhelmed, perhaps even hurting. She didn't see that I had been planning this long before she realized she had abandoned me. Then came the psychological elements. I allowed her to see, through careful public-facing interactions, that I had moved on, not flamboyantly, not to provoke jealousy, but subtly. Independence, composure, calm enjoyment of life without her interference. Mutual friends began to notice. Her narrative about me being boring was crumbling under the quiet evidence that I was stable, autonomous, and untouchable. When she attempted to manipulate mutual contacts, claiming exaggerations or fabrications about our history, I responded with facts, documentation, precise, emotionless proof of reality. Every attempt she made to twist the truth was met with clarity. Every lie she attempted to assert dissolved under the weight of accuracy and legality. The apartment I had once shared became a case study of my methods. Every appliance I had purchased, every service I had set up, every comfort I had provided, gone. The absence was not theatrical, not vengeful in appearance, but undeniable in effect. She walked into the shell I had left behind and faced the consequence of her choices. The life she had relied on without recognition evaporated. Messages poured in, frantic, desperate, increasingly erratic. She tried bargaining, tried guilt, tried manipulation, but each attempt was met with the same calm, methodical detachment. I did not respond with emotion. I responded with certainty. Every interaction reinforced the lesson. Dependence without respect is temporary. Stability without appreciation can be removed quietly, without drama, without violence. I watched as she tried to fill the void with Todd, as if chaos could truly replace the life she had once shared with me. But it could not. Todd was a storm. I had been a foundation, and now that foundation was gone. The apartment, the services, the infrastructure, all removed. The only thing remaining was her reckoning with what she had truly lost. The quiet satisfaction grew slowly, like a flame fanned gently by patience. I didn't gloat, I didn't taunt, I simply allowed reality to assert itself. The truth, the consequences of her choices spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. In the following weeks, her behavior changed. Desperation turned to reflection. Attempts to reach me diminished. The messages that arrived became tentative, softer, tinged with remorse. But I had already learned the final rule. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing does not grant access back into my life. Actions, not words, determine outcomes. And so I let her watch from the sidelines as I reconstructed my life without her, calmly and efficiently. The apartment I had vacated was no longer hers to manipulate. My finances were separated, my independence restored. The stability she had ignored now became the stage upon which I asserted the quiet power of patience, intelligence, and legality.
She had underestimated me at every turn. My silence, my patience, my methodical planning, and in her miscalculation I found the ultimate satisfaction. No violence, no outburst, no revenge that could be misconstrued or regretted. Only clarity, precision, and the unshakable authority of someone who refused to be treated as a placeholder. The final step was letting her come to terms with it on her own. I never reached out to explain, I never justified, I simply existed beyond her reach, calm, self-contained, and untouchable. The lesson was delivered not through confrontation, but through the undeniable evidence of my life reclaimed, of my agency restored, of the equilibrium I had built and maintained. And through it all, I discovered an unexpected truth. Revenge does not require chaos or drama. It requires patience, intelligence, and the courage to wait until every piece is aligned perfectly. And when that moment arrives, justice unfolds quietly, inevitably, and with a satisfaction far deeper than any impulsive act could ever deliver. I sat alone in my new apartment, a quiet space untouched by the echoes of what had been. The city outside hummed with life, indifferent to the storm that had passed between us, and I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. It was not triumph or victory, it was relief. The kind that comes from reclaiming your own narrative, from finally removing yourself from a story that never truly valued you. Messages from her had slowed to almost nothing. The frantic anger, the desperate attempts to manipulate, had faded into silence. And I realized something. She didn't miss me. She missed the comfort I had provided, the stability, the life that required effort but offered security. She missed the infrastructure, not the person. And for the first time, I understood fully the truth I had been living alongside for 2 years. Reflection came slowly, like sunlight creeping into a room at dawn. I thought back to the nights I stayed awake organizing her bills, co-signing loans, arranging her life while chaos lingered around her. I remembered the moments I had overlooked the warning signs, the subtle glances at Todd, the comments about what she missed from her past. I realized that patience, stability, and care were not always appreciated by those who thrive on unpredictability. And yet, there was no bitterness in that understanding, only clarity. I had acted not in anger, not in spite, but with deliberate intention. Every step I had taken, from the silent observation to the meticulous planning, the legal reclamation of what was mine, the psychological precision of my withdrawal, was proof that intelligence and patience are far more potent than chaos and charm. I allowed myself a small smile. For the first time in 2 years, I had achieved something that Todd could never have offered, something no amount of charisma or drama could replicate: control over my own life. I had reclaimed my time, my energy, my stability. The quiet satisfaction that rose within me was not loud or showy. It was deep,
unshakable, and entirely mine. I thought about her briefly, not with longing, not with regret, but with acceptance. She would continue her life, drawn to the chaos she loved, oblivious to the subtle lesson I had delivered. The cost of treating loyalty and stability as disposable is a reality that cannot be reversed. She had learned it too late, but I had learned long before. The value of my own worth, the necessity of patience, and the quiet power of measured action. As I prepared dinner, the aroma filling the kitchen, I realized that the life I had once built for someone else could now be built entirely for me. Every choice was mine, every hour unclaimed by the expectations or whims of another. And in that simple, quiet truth, I found the deepest satisfaction. I settled into my chair with a book I had been meaning to read, the city lights casting a soft glow across the room. There was no dramatic fanfare, no public declaration, no vindictive gesture, only the calm, undeniable reality that I had survived, adapted, and reclaimed my life. That, in itself, was enough. And as I reflected on the journey, I felt a subtle shift within myself. Freedom does not roar. Freedom does not demand recognition. It exists quietly, patiently, and with the knowledge that you have chosen yourself above all else. For anyone listening, remember this. If someone ever calls you a downgrade, if someone ever treats your patience and loyalty as convenience, do not rush to anger or despair. Observe, plan, act deliberately, and when the moment comes, reclaim your life, not through chaos, but through clarity, intelligence, and unwavering patience. I took a deep breath, the kind that settles into your chest and roots you in the present, and I smiled softly. My life was mine again, completely, unapologetically, and without compromise. And if you've stayed with me through this story, remember, there are countless others like this out there, stories of betrayal, patience, and quiet justice. If you want to hear more, stay with Payback Ties, where the calm often speaks louder than the storm.